Hello and welcome. My name is Jess and you're listening to Legal Teeny, your very own sip of law school. The goal of this podcast is to give you just a taste of what it's like going to law school. Whether you're already in school, considering it, have a loved one currently experiencing the fun that is law school, or you just want to follow my journey, I'm so glad you're here. You can also follow me on Instagram at legalteeny_podcast and check out my website legalteeny.com. And if you enjoy the podcast, don't forget to rate and review below. Grab your legal teeny and let's take a sip. Good morning and happy fall. It feels like it's finally getting cool outside, and at least here the leaves are sort of starting to change and we've got a little bit of a crisp in the air, so that's exciting news for me. This week on Legal Teeny, I want to talk about networking and why it matters so much. We hear it basically at every training for young adults. We hear it from our parents, we hear it from our colleagues and friends and teachers. Basically everyone is shouting networking. But what even is it and why does it matter? Shouldn't I just be focused on my grades? And how do I even do it? Is there some secret script? Is there a cookie cutter version that I can copy paste with all the people that I'm networking with at events? So this is a big old topic. I'm going to break it down into 2 episodes. This first one focuses on what it is and why it matters so much and the benefits that you'll reap now and later. The second episode will focus on exactly how to do it, tips for getting over those nerves, ways to practice and get better. So be sure to hit the follow button below so you don't miss the how-to episode when it comes out. Most of the students that I talk to now at school have this really big cloud over their heads when it comes to networking. They either feel like it's stupid and they should be focused on getting grades because that's how you get good jobs, or they feel somewhat lost and like they know they should be doing it, but they have zero idea on how to even approach it. A friend of mine actually this week told me that she doesn't even know where to start and kind of looked at me like, what do you mean you're already networking? So first, let's dispel what networking is not, because I think that will clear up a lot of confusion. There's 4 things that I think, and of course I have a list because you know me, I love my lists. There's 4 things that I think networking is not. Number 1, it is not going out and getting drunk with people until you become friends. I won't say that that doesn't work. It doesn't create a network because it sort of does. And some people actually do make that work for them, but that's not the sort of bridges that I would encourage you to make. Those are bridges, and it's not inherently bad, but I think that there is a more strategic and there's a smarter way to approach this. The second thing that networking is not is a rigid, formulaic meeting where you ask canned questions. That means you now have a network relationship and you can greet them by name the next time that you see them. That's boring and will not be memorable for the person that you're meeting or for you. Networking is also not an obligation that you check off of a list once and then you can say, okay, great, I've networked. It's just not a linear thread that gets you immediately from point A to point B. People say it's how you get jobs, but it's rare indeed to make one networking connection and immediately get a job offer. No, that's not really how it works. Networking is also not one-sided. Don't think of it as only what they can do for you. What if you treated your friends that way? What if it was the only reason you had friends is for what they could do for you? That's just not how a connection or a mutual connection works. They wouldn't want to be your friend for that long if all you cared about is what they could do for you. That's probably one of the worst ways to network, but I'll talk about that again a little bit later. So those are the 4 things that I believe networking is not. So now let's turn to what networking is. You should think of networking sort of like building a net. It's called a network. That's easy to remember. Again, it's not a singular thread. It goes in lots of directions and even to places that you don't think you want to go. At some point, that connection might be differently positioned, or you might change your path. I'm sure you've heard the expression, don't burn bridges. It's so true because you have no idea who will be in a position of power later in your life to make a decision about your career or anything else. But the more relevant version of that expression that I will make here is to build every bridge you can get your hands on. You never know which path you'll find yourself on, and the more bridges that you build, the more options that you have from that path. And this is especially important when you're in school, still trying to figure out what you want to do after you graduate. You might think you know, and congratulations if you do. You might think you know, or you might be drowning in the many directions that you could take. And either way, build all the bridges, forge every path, get excited about every connection. Your enthusiasm will be evident, and you truly don't know who's going to remember you and think of you somewhere down the line. The next thing that networking is literally a safety net. Maybe you make all these plans and then all of a sudden a global pandemic hits and your plans fall through, or maybe something completely out of your control happens. A woman that I met with a few weeks ago told me that she graduated in 2002, and many law students had jobs lined up after they graduated in 2002 that literally disappeared when the trade towers went down on 9/11 because there were so many law firms housed there that just sort of went away. So you just never know. Or someone who graduated in 08 or 09 during the major recession during those years, you just never know what's going to happen, and it's best to prepare along the way for the unknown. I don't mean for you to be very doomsday and think that, oh my gosh, the worst is going to happen, let's bunker down. That's not the direction I'm going with this, but you do want to have some level of preparation for the unknown. Making solid connections that you can call in a pinch, that's one way to do it. The people who you want to jump in and help you and, help you figure out what you need to do next, you have to create those relationships before you expect to rely on them. So view it as a safety net. It's something to sort of lean on when you need it. The next thing is that it's two-sided. Find a way to be valuable to your connections. And I know that as a student, you might be thinking, what on earth could I offer to an attorney or someone who is so much more seasoned than I am? And that's a great question. And honestly, I understand the feeling. It's really tough to position yourself as someone who can provide something to them, but there are ways to be a resource to them even when you're young. The first way is to offer to connect them to others who they might want to network with. If you have done enough networking, you become a connector. This is a great place to be. And once you get to the point where you can say, oh, I have to connect you with so-and-so, then you've become a connector. And you can even do this as a student. You could tell a professional about a student that you know who would be interested in their line of work, or vice versa. You could be a resource to your current classmates who, just as a reminder, are your current and future colleagues, and you should be networking to a degree with them also. If your entire class views you as a resource, how many connections can you make with just classmates alone? So offering to connect all of your resources is another way to keep building out your net. The next way is to tell them about your plans for the future. This will tell them how they can count on you in the future. If you say you eventually want to get into tax law and they run a small firm, you can keep up with them and maybe eventually they'll call you about their small business taxes. Maybe they'll refer a client to you. Maybe they'll call you about their personal taxes. Hold yourself out to them as willing to offer a service in the future. And you don't need to berate them with that, but we all want to have someone to call when we need help with taxes. So we all need those resources. Third, become an expert in something. Read some additional articles, and I know reading sounds like a horrible idea to a law student, but just hear me out. Read some additional articles about a topic that interests you. Take a master class, shadow a job that you find just extremely interesting that isn't even in your field or isn't even the direction that you're wanting to go. My point is absorb. And when you're meeting with someone, you can educate them or open their eyes to something, tell them about an article that you read. They'll begin to view you as a source of information or experience. And I'll share one of my experiences with that in just a couple minutes. But this is the best part. You don't need to view it as burdensome. Just open your eyes and ears to opportunities and learn new things. And that translates into being useful and a resource to other people. Even just watching a documentary that's relatable makes you have some depth that the person you're connecting with could find valuable. Another way to look at this piece is to get away from just being sort of a flat, one-dimensional, here's the kind of law that I want to practice kind of a student, or even just a person trying to make a connection, not necessarily a student, but getting away from that one-dimensional, I don't want to say boring, but give yourself some zhuzh, give yourself some emphasis. I'll talk more about how to present yourself in this way in my next episode, but for now, just understanding that anything you do to diversify yourself from a crowd of other students or professionals is going to help you develop more meaningful connections. One of those ways is to have a depth of knowledge into multiple unique areas. So this has all still been sort of under that umbrella of it's two-sided, find a way to be valuable to your connection. So the last piece of that sort of sub-umbrella, ask them, how can I be a resource for you? So in your meetings, whenever you're chatting with them, can I do anything for you? Do you need anything from me? How can I be a resource for you? Even if they can't think of anything in the moment, you've now opened yourself up to them thinking about how they could utilize you. Maybe you offer to keep an eye out for a student that's interested in their avenue of law. Maybe you offer that if they ever need an inside scoop about a coworker or fellow student, that you'd be happy to chat about it. So those are some ways that you can make sure that the road is two-sided and make sure that you're valuable to the connections that you're making. The last thing about networking is that it's ongoing. So better buckle up and get good at it. Don't think that this is just a rite of passage and you have to do it to get your summer internship and from there the job will flow. This is part of adulting and it's part of the professional world, and it's really not as scary as you might be thinking that it is. The key to making a wide net is that you keep adding to it and you keep the connections strong. You'll get better as you go along, so don't stress about being great at it yet. So now that we have an idea of what networking is, let's figure out why the heck it's so important. Let's say you develop one network connection that you create each semester of your law school. That seems reasonable. That comes out to 6 people by the end of your years that you can call when you're looking for a new job, when you have someone that you know that's looking for a job who needs one, when you have an opening that your boss asks you if you have any good contacts to interview. That's 6 people to reach out to when you're needing some more referrals for a law firm that you just started. That's 6 people to call if you get laid off without notice. Now imagine that you did 6 per semester. That's 36 people on your roster by the end of school, all in different areas of law or whatever industry you're a part of. 6 per semester isn't too crazy at all. I designate, personally, time each week to send out networking emails, and I typically meet with 2 people per week, sometimes over Zoom, sometimes in person. I spend probably 20 minutes per week researching who to connect with, and then it takes like 5 minutes to send a few emails out. And I'll tell you how to do that, and I'll tell you how I find the people and how I reach out in my next podcast when I go deeper into the how. But right now, I just want to get 2 points across. It is extremely important, and it's extremely easy to get started. But I digress. Okay, back to the 36 people in your network by the time that you even graduate from law school. That doesn't count the people that you meet at formal networking events or who you interview with but don't end up working for. Those folks all count. If you have that many people in your corner, you will be best equipped to handle the uncertainty that is everybody's future. We truly don't know what is ahead, and that's okay. The way to enjoy the ride is to know that you've got some sort of safety net below you that you can call when you need. And this isn't to say that if you have a network, you'll never be unemployed or confused or feel lost again. No, not at all. But at least you'll have a starting point and some warm or even hot leads to get started. This is a much better scenario than starting cold with only people that you met at formal networking events 2 years ago to lean on, right? I mean, you don't want to be calling someone saying, we met 4 years ago and I was just wondering if you have a job for me. I mean, maybe it'll work and that's bold, but those aren't the connections that are going to really show up for you. So let me give you some examples. I remember years ago when Hurricane Harvey hit Houston really hard. I was running a skilled nursing facility in Austin at the time, and facilities in Houston were calling, asking if we could take in evacuees from their nursing homes in Houston. So they sent patients from facilities in Houston to stay at my facility until the storm passed because they had flooding and there were, power outages, all of that. So we had all these patients show up in less than 2 hours. They were all needing critical nursing care. We had beds in hallways. We had nurses sleeping in the library. We had, not to mention the torrential downpour of rain outside. I mean, it was flooding our facility. We had sandbags piled up at every external door. We lost power. I remember just standing in my office, it was probably 10 p.m., looking in the mirror and just thinking, this is the hardest thing you've ever done. How are you going to respond? And it was a fight with myself because what I wanted to do was crawl under my desk and hide, but I knew that people were counting on me, and I knew deep down that I was being challenged for a reason. I knew this was preparing me for the next thing, which would in turn prepare me for the next, and it carries on, and that's how life goes. And in that moment, I knew I had a choice to either buck up and handle it or to crumble. And obviously, I decided to take the challenge head on and do the very best that I could. And it was an all hands on deck experience that I had never gone through. But you know who I called? My network, you guessed it. Not because I needed a job. I had a job and I needed help. I called people who I hadn't honestly talked to in ages just to ask what they were planning to do, what they recommended, if I was missing anything, just to vent. I mean, I called them and we just hashed out what was going to happen and what we needed to do. I leaned on the people that I had built this network with, and we supported each other. And then, several years later when COVID hit, it was the same thing. Well, maybe not the same thing because none of us had ever really experienced something like this. I'm sure you can relate to this because every person in the world went through some version of the, oh heck, what's going to happen general panic that we all did. Those first 2 weeks when we thought we were going to flatten the curve, which is hilarious now, of course, were nothing compared to the 2 years that followed. We stood up at my facility. I was running a rehab facility at that time. We stood up a COVID unit in our facility to help nearby hospitals with their patient load since they were maxed out. We had multiple outbreaks in the facility we had to try to manage, and we had to protect those that we were caring for and our employees who had families at home. We had, people passing away in our facility that didn't get to see their families again. I mean, it was pretty atrocious. And we had entire groups of staff out with the infection at once, and so we had to use the state military personnel to staff the facility. And you know who I was on the phone with every day? The people going through the very same things at other facilities across the state. And what's interesting is that eventually, most times, they were the ones calling me asking what we were doing. I had become a resource to my network, and that was an incredible feeling. And the way that I did that was to do the research myself. And I did a ton of digging, and I was organized, and I had resources that were sort of lined up so that when I stumbled across an issue, I knew exactly what to do. And so folks would call me to say, what do I do? And I could immediately just give off a list of everything that needed to be done and the resources that they needed because I had become that resource to them. I talked about earlier how to be a resource to your network, and especially as a young professional, this is an example of that. Do the research yourself, become an expert on something, connect them to someone who can answer the question, offer to make that call, offer to dig a little bit and call them right back, and then deliver on it. They'll see you as a valuable resource that you are. You truly are a resource to them already. So we've established that your network will be a group of people that you lean on when you need support. And obviously, it's a group that's hopefully going to help you get a job and move through jobs as your career progresses. The last piece is that this entire group becomes part of your community. Not everyone in your network is someone that you'd love to grab lunch with, I'll admit that, but many are. And you'll continue to learn from each other and celebrate life milestones and attend weddings and baby showers. I mean, all those things. You'll hear about their job transitions and you'll see them at conferences, and it's fun and rewarding to have a network of people who have your back and are there for you at every step of your journey. The key is to start sooner than you think to develop those relationships. The more bridges that you build, the more your horizon expands and your life map sort of develops, and every alliance opens a door and creates more space. So next week on Legal Teeny, we'll cover exactly how to develop those connections. So don't forget to click follow so you don't miss it. That is everything that I have for you for this week's episode. Again, don't forget to check out next week if you're interested in the how piece. Please check me out on Instagram. It's at legalteeny_podcast, and check out my website. It's legalteeny.com. Thanks so much for listening. This has been Legal Teeny, your very own sip of law school.